You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. What I'm doing in today's show is looking at some players in the G League who have been putting up some pretty good numbers, just names to keep an eye on in case their situations change over the course of the season and they get a call up, whether they're on good teams or bad teams. They are names to watch just because of their production. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. Let's start with JaJuan Morgan, a 6'7" wing who is in the Utah Jazz system. He is leading the entirety of the G League in PIPM this season, all-in-one metric, averaging 16 points per game this season, but 2 steals, almost 2 blocks with 8 rebounds, shooting an extraordinary 74% on 2s and 41% on 3s. Now, of course, this Jazz team has guys like Ingles, like Bogdanovic, playing at the 3 and the 4 and the 2, however you want to phrase that. Royce O'Neal in that mix as well. But anything can happen. Guys can get bought out from other teams, and then players have to be waived, and other guys have to come in. We could get a rash of injuries, and Ingles and Bogdanovic both go down at the same time, and Morgan's pushed into a 20-minute-a-night role. He's just a name to keep an eye on because of how good these numbers have been for him. A box plus minus of 12.1 is absolutely astronomical. A true shooting of 76%, a PER of over 30 in his 12 games for the Salt Lake Stars. JaJuan Morgan putting up some really, really big numbers, and they look fantasy friendly as well if that opportunity does somehow come his way. This one here has a lot more chance of coming to fruition, and that is Kenny Wooten of the Westchester Knicks, of the New York Knicks. They've just recently signed him. Now, they aren't playing him at this point, but we all know that Taj Gibson, Bobby Portis, maybe they're going to be bought out or minimized in the rotation. The coach seems to hate Mitch Robinson. Wooten is averaging an astonishing 3.6 blocks in his 26 games in only 24 minutes a night. He's shooting 66% from the field. Now, he has some of the similar limitations as Robinson in terms of not doing much else and being a poor free throw shooter, but another guy that's really high up in PIPM, and a real opportunity could be coming Wooten's way as that block streamer who could come in, play 20 minutes and get 2 blocks a night at the back end of your season. He's at least a name that you have to pay attention to. Devontae Kachuk of the South Bay Lakers is putting up some really big numbers. Now, the Lakers obviously have Anthony Davis, they have JaVale McGee, they have Dwight Howard. But we always hear the Lakers as a team that is someone who is always in the market for a buyout player. If players need to get bought out, players can get waived, and Kachuk could be one of those guys that's on the chopping block as they look to rotate through 10-day contracts or two-way guys. Kachuk could find himself on a roster. He played pretty well in Summer League as well. Yeah, on a last 10 days of the season somewhere to provide good value. Averaging 12 boards, 19 points, shooting 68% from the field. Now, he's not doing too much else there. He's not a good shot blocker. The assists are low. He doesn't hit threes, but he's got a pretty strong PIPM. He's a really like a Montrezl Harrell sort of type of guy. A bloke who's a good points and rebounds guy who struggles in some of those other areas, but we know in limited minutes, those sort of higher usage, big rebounding sort of players can have a lot of fantasy utility, and Kachuk is just a name, again, to pay attention to. Chimezie Metu also putting up some pretty good numbers for the San Antonio Spurs and the Austin Spurs. He's averaging almost 17 points and 8.5 boards. Almost 2 blocks with 1.4 steals, shooting 60% from the field. He's also banging in 40% of his triples on almost 2 attempts per game. Box score plus minus of 4.1, taking big steps forward this year. PER of 25, a true shooting of 63%. Now, of course, the Spurs have LaMarcus Aldridge. There's Jakob Poeltl in that front court as well. But aside from those guys, there's not really much happening there. And you could see a scenario where Rudy Gay gets hurt, Aldridge gets hurt. We see Metu come in, who can play the 4 and the 5, and his ability to rack up those defensive stats, which he showed a little bit of at USC as well. His scoring has been okay. At least someone for a Spurs team who might be able to out of the playoffs when we come to the back end of March, start of April. Metu's a guy that I do think that they want to get in as a rotation guy at some point in the next couple of seasons, and he might get a little bit of an opportunity here. Naz Reid, everyone's going to want to hear about Naz Reid because Karl Anthony Towns is out with a wrist injury and he's going to miss games after the All-Star break. Reid has been the backup center there ahead of the Wizard Amari Spellman, and he is averaging in his 16 games for the Iowa Wolves 18 and 10 with 2 blocks and 1.5 steals. Massively strong numbers, great box score plus minus stuff, strong PER, good true shooting. Defensively, he does struggle, but he's not afraid of taking shots. We know that. His usage rate is at 24%. And if Towns is out, someone else has to take the shots. Now, Russell's going to take those shots. We're going to see Beasley take those shots as well. But there is an opportunity here for Reid. And out of all these guys, if there's anyone I'm adding at the moment, it is Naz, just with the situation with Towns. They'll probably start James Johnson at center, but if Reid gets 22 to 23 minutes, he can be a fantasy-relevant guy already. And more stuff still to come on a bad team. Another Utah Jazz guy, I have to mention him because he's been doing so well in the G League, and that is RayJon Tucker, who's seen some action in the NBA, but averaging 24 points in the G League on 39% three-point shooting, 3 assists per game as well. Really, really strong offensive producer, and we've even seen it when he's played in the NBA that he does have an ability to get those shots off. Now, with Jordan Clarkson filling that role, there's not much there for Tucker, but if something was to happen to Clarkson and to Conley, I don't think the Jazz would have any hesitation in putting Tucker into the regular rotation. And deeper leagues, there is something at least to see there with him, a guy that has really stood out at G League level, and they waived Jeff Green to get this guy onto their roster. Caleb Martin of the Greensboro Swarm. He's been in the rotation for the Charlotte Hornets of late. He's averaging 21 points a game in the G League, which is not what you really associate Martin with. He's doing it by shooting 36% from 3 on almost 7 attempts per game, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.6 steals, almost a block a game. A real fantasy mixed bag right across the board. And with the Hornets seemingly not interested in Dwayne Bacon, Nick Batum's out of the rotation. If guys like Graham or Rozier start getting hurt, if his brother Cody Martin isn't there is an opportunity here for someone like Caleb Martin to carve out a role and show that he can produce in multiple statistical categories, like we've seen from him so far across the G League season. The next guy we take a look at is Jared Harper of the Phoenix Suns. The Suns aren't likely to make the playoffs. So Harper, with Rick Rubio ahead of him, and then a bunch of guys like Jalen LeCue, Ali Okobo, Javon Carter, Ty Jerome, who have all had significant injury problems this season. There is an opportunity here for Harper, who's averaging 21 and 5 across the 30 games he's played for the Northern Arizona Suns so far this season. He's banging in almost 3 triples a game on 36% shooting, which is really strong. The 1.2 steals is good as well. We've seen multiple point guards come in from Phoenix at times at the end of the season and put up some decent numbers. And yes, they do have quite a few other guys playing that position, which could hamper Harper's ability overall, but there is a whole bunch of talent in what we've seen from him so far that I don't think the Suns will be completely against at least seeing what he can do, because they're not sold on a Kobo or Carter or Jerome or any of these guys just at this point. So Harper could come in and be one of those, tank commanders down the stretch end of the season, and a guy that can absolutely put up shots. We've seen that from him in the G League. Usage of, where is his usage? 31% with an assist rate of 31%. So really mini Trae Young sort of a role, just dominating the ball and doing everything for that Northern Arizona team. The last guy I want to talk about is in Detroit. It's another point guard. It is the Boner, Jordan Bone, who in his 24 games for the Grand Rapids, I can't remember the name of their team. Let's have a look. What's their team? The Grand Rapids Rise, maybe? I don't actually remember what their team name is. I completely blanked. The Grand Rapids Drive. That's it. What am I talking about? 18 points per game, 7 assists per game, 41% three-point shooting on 2.5 threes a game. Really good stuff from Bone, who's looked okay in his auditions so far. Now, we know Luke Kennard's out. Luke Kennard might not come back with his knee injury. We just don't know at this stage. There is Derrick Rose, hardly a beacon of health. Reggie Jackson, where the buyout whispers have already started. Svi Mykhailiuk, not a point guard. Who thinks it's outrageous that Bone could play 25 minutes a night in April for this Pistons team, who really isn't going anywhere? And he was a second-round pick who has started to show some signs in his little moments in the NBA and put up some really strong numbers at the G League level. Now, defensively, he struggled a lot in the G League, but there is still some value in him there with that ability to score, but more importantly, that ability to generate assists at a pretty strong level. All All right, so there are 9 guys in the G League just to keep an eye on. The chances of them actually having too much of an impact in fantasy is pretty low, but it's a good idea to have an eye on these names. And just for the future, guys especially like Wooten, like Metu, I think, as well, and even someone like Bone or Rajon Tucker, guys who I think can be options in future seasons to come. Don't forget, subscribe to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Leave a comment down below, give it a thumbs up, and a 5-star rating or review. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.